My daughter-in-law is blackmailing me for $500,000, claiming I intentionally poisoned my grandson with a peanut butter cookie. And my own son is standing right beside her, helping her destroy me. I am sitting here in the dark of my estate, shaking uncontrollably, holding a lawsuit that accuses me of being a senile monster who tried to kill a child I adore more than life itself. They want me to sign over control of my entire fortune tonight, or they will send me to prison and I will never see my family again. I feel like my heart is being ripped out of my chest. I raised my son to be a good man. I paid for his education, his wedding, and his home, yet he is looking at me with cold, dead eyes, waiting for me to surrender everything I own. They think I am frail. They think I am confused. They do not know that I found the empty bottle of poison in the trash can, and I know they staged the whole attack just to get their hands on my money. Is there any pain in this world worse than realizing the child you birthed loves your bank account more than he loves you? I have the evidence to expose them, but doing so means destroying my son's life forever. I feel so betrayed that I can barely breathe. I just rewrote my will, but I am terrified to make the next move. Please, I need someone to tell me I am doing the right thing. Am I a terrible mother for wanting to report them to the police? Everyone. My hands are tied and my heart is broken. What should I do? My name is Charlotta Ann Miller. I am 68 years old, a retired interior designer, and the sole owner of the Miller Estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. To the outside world, I am the enviable widow who has it all. A 5-bedroom colonial revival home sitting on 3 acres of pristine snow-covered lawn. A diversified portfolio that my late husband, Richard, meticulously built, and a reputation in our gated community as the hostess who never misses a beat. But if you were to stand in the center of my foyer right now, under the crystal chandelier that costs more than most people's cars, the only thing you would hear is silence. It is a heavy, expensive silence. It was 3 days before Christmas, and my kitchen was a battlefield of flour and sugar. This was my ritual, my armor against the encroaching loneliness that tends to swallow widows whole during the holidays. I was preparing my famous 15-cookie spread. It was a tradition Richard and I started 40 years ago, and I refused to let it die with him. The granite island was covered in cooling racks. There were gingerbread men with perfectly piped icing buttons, snickerdoodles dusted with just the right ratio of cinnamon to sugar, and my signature creation, heavy, golden peanut butter cookies topped with a Hershey's Kiss. I wiped my hands on my floral apron and looked out the French windows. The snow was falling softly, coating the long driveway. It looked like a scene from a greeting card, the kind you buy to prove to your neighbors that your life is perfect. Inside my head, however, the monologue was less poetic. Charlotte, you are baking enough calories to feed a small army, and the only person here to eat them is the ghost of your husband and a cat that hates you. I knew, deep down, that I was overcompensating. I was trying to buy the presence of my family with sugar and butter because I was terrified that without these bribes, they would not come at all. The phone rang, shattering the quiet. The caller identification flashed Mark. My heart did that foolish little leap it always does when my son calls. Mark is 38, a man who still has the soft eyes of a boy who needs his mother. But lately, those eyes have been clouded by something else. Fear, perhaps, or maybe just exhaustion. Hello, darling, I answered, forcing my voice to sound light, breezy, unbothered. I was just pulling the peanut butter blossoms out of the oven. Your favorite. There was a pause on the other end, a hesitation that lasted 2 seconds too long. "Mom," Mark said. His voice was tight, as if he were reading from a script. "We need to talk about the menu for Christmas Eve." I frowned, my hand hovering over a tray of cookies. "The menu? It is the same menu we have had for 3 decades. Mark, roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, and the cookie table. It is about the cookies," he said. I could hear a sharp intake of breath in the background. Someone was whispering to him. It was Jessica, my daughter-in-law. "Jessica is worried about Leo. We cannot have any peanuts in the house." None at all. My frown deepened into a scowl that I was glad he could not see. "Mark, do not be absurd. Leo is 12 years old. He has a mild sensitivity. The last time he ate a peanut, he got a hive on his arm. 1 hive. We gave him some Benadryl and he was fine in 20 minutes. It has gotten worse." Charlotte, the voice did not belong to Mark anymore. Jessica had taken the phone. Her tone was smooth, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. It reminded me of the sound of a credit card swiping through a machine. "Jessica," I said, stiffening, "how lovely to hear from you. Leo's allergist says his condition has escalated." Jessica lied. I knew she was lying. I could hear it in the cadence of her voice. That overly confident assertion she used whenever she wanted to get her way without being questioned. "It is airborne now. If there are peanut particles in the ventilation system, he could go into anaphylactic shock. We cannot bring him there if you are baking those. Saoyutsing haling, 2 hashes greater than things. Those things." She spoke of my husband's favorite recipe as if I were cooking methamphetamine in the basement. "I have already baked 4 dozen, I said, trying to keep my temper in check. "I can put them in the sunroom. It is completely sealed off from the main house. I will put a label on them. Leo is a smart boy. He knows not to eat them." "No," Jessica snapped. "It is too risky. Honestly, Charlotte, I am surprised you would even consider prioritizing a cookie over your grandson's life. It feels a bit Saoyutsing haling, 2 hashes greater than selfish." The word hung in the air. Selfish. I looked around my kitchen, at the thousands of dollars of ingredients, the days of labor, the house I had decorated solely for their enjoyment. I was offering them an inheritance, a sanctuary, a home, and she called me selfish because I wanted to maintain one small piece of my past. "I am not being selfish, Jessica," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I am being traditional, but fine. If it means that much to you, I will seal them away. I will buy a glass display case with a lock. Leo will be nowhere near them. If I see a single peanut crumb near my son, we are leaving," Jessica said, "and Mark agrees with me. Do not you?" "Mark? Yeah. Mom," Mark's voice came back on the line, defeated and small. "Just Saoyutsing haling, 2 hashes greater than please do not make this a thing. We really need this money. Saoyutsing haling, 2 hashes greater than, I mean. We really need this holiday to go well. We really need this money." He corrected himself quickly, but I heard it. A cold shiver went down my spine that had nothing to do with the winter draft. My son was a financial advisor. He was supposed to be doing well, yet, for the last 6 months, he had been evasive. He had stopped wearing his Rolex. He drove a rental car the last time he visited, claiming his Mercedes was in the shop. "Mark," I asked, lowering my voice, "is everything all right? Financially, everything is great." "Mom, perfect. he said. Too quickly. We will see you on the 24th. Get rid of the peanuts. Charlotte, I mean it. The line went dead. I stood there, holding the receiver, staring at the tray of golden, warm peanut butter cookies. They smelled like comfort. They smelled like the days when Richard would sneak into the kitchen at midnight and steal two while I pretended to sleep. Now, they smelled like a threat. Jessica was up to something. I had always known she was ambitious. A woman who looked at a marriage license as a business merger. But this level of control was new. And Mark sounded like a man drowning who was afraid to wave for help because his wife was holding his head under the water. I walked over to the trash can. For a second, I considered throwing the cookies away. It would be the easy thing to do, the submissive thing to do. No, I thought, this is my house. I went to the pantry and pulled out a heavy glass cake dome with a locking latch. I would keep the cookies. I would place them on a separate table in the corner of the dining room. I would label them with a bright red warning card. I would do exactly what they asked. Keep Leo safe. But I would not let Jessica Miller erase my existence in my own home. I did not know it then, as I carefully arranged the cookies under the glass. But I was setting the stage for my own execution. I was giving her exactly the weapon she needed. The dining room table was set with the precision of a military operation. I had spent the better part of the afternoon polishing the silver until my reflection in the soup spoons looked less like a tired old woman and more like the formidable matriarch I pretended to be. In the far corner of the room, on a separate mahogany side table, sat the glass dome containing the peanut butter cookies. I had placed a large red card next to it that read, "Caution, contains nuts." It looked like a quarantine zone in the middle of a Victorian Christmas spread. But I had done exactly what was asked of me. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock sharp, the sound echoed through the empty hallway like a gavel striking a judge's bench. I smoothed down the front of my velvet dress and went to answer it. Mark stood on the porch, shaking snow off his coat. He looked thinner than I remembered. His skin had a grayish pallor that usually belongs to men who spend their nights staring at ceilings. Unable to sleep, beside him stood Jessica, wrapped in a white faux fur coat that made her look like an ice queen from a fairy tale written to frighten children. And there was Leo, my 12-year-old grandson, standing slightly behind them, his eyes glued to his boots. "Merry Christmas," I said, opening my arms to hug my son. Mark hugged me back, but it was brief and distracted. He smelled of peppermint breath mints and something else underneath. A stale bourbon. It was barely evening. "Shoes," Jessica said sharply before I could even greet her. I blinked. "Excuse me? We are keeping our shoes on," Jessica announced, stepping into the foyer and bypassing my outstretched hand. The floors in these old houses are always so drafty and dusty. I do not want Leo walking around in his socks. He has a sensitive constitution. I looked at my pristine hardwood floors, which had been waxed yesterday by the cleaning service. They were spotless. "Of course," I said, swallowing the lump of irritation rising in my throat. "Hello, Leo. Look at how tall you have grown." I bent down to hug the boy. Leo flinched. His eyes darted immediately to his mother. Jessica gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, and only then did the boy allow me to embrace him. His body was stiff, like a board. He did not hug me back. "Hi, Grandma," he whispered. "Careful." "Leo," Jessica warned, her voice sickly sweet. "Do not breathe in too deep. You know how old houses have mold spores." We moved into the dining room. I watched closely as Jessica's eyes scanned the table. She did not look at the floral centerpiece I had arranged. She did not look at the hand-embroidered napkins. Her gaze locked onto the corner table where the cookies sat under the glass dome. "I see you insisted on making them," she said, her lip curling slightly. "They are sealed." "Jessica," I replied, keeping my voice even, airtight, "and they are 15 feet away from the main table." "Risky," she muttered. She walked over to her designated seat. Then she did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into her expensive handbag and pulled out a packet of industrial-strength antibacterial wipes. Without saying a word, she began to wipe down her place setting. She scrubbed the rim of the crystal wine glass. She wiped the surface of the Limoges china plate. Plates that had belonged to my grandmother and were worth more than her entire wardrobe. She even wiped the silverware. The squeak of the wet wipe against the fine china was the only sound in the room. It was a screeching, abrasive noise that grated on my nerves. "Jessica," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "those dishes are clean. They were washed and sterilized this morning." She did not stop scrubbing. She did not even look at me. "I am sure they were." "Charlotte, but you live alone. You have a cat. Things get overlooked. Seniors often. 少于经好令. Dose. Miss spots. It is just a fact of aging. I am just protecting my family." I looked at Mark, pleading silently for him to say something, to defend me, to tell his wife that she was insulting his mother in her own home. Mark did not look up. He was busy pouring himself a glass of wine, filling it almost to the brim. He took a large gulp, his hand trembling slightly. "It is fine, Mom," Mark said, his voice thick. "She is just being careful. Let it go. Let it go." That was Mark's mantra. He had spent his entire life letting things go, and now he was letting his wife dismantle my dignity piece by piece. We sat down to eat. The roast beef was perfect, pink in the center and tender, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. The conversation was stilted. Jessica dominated the air, talking about Leo's new private school, his dietary restrictions, his fragile immune system. She spoke about him as if he were a delicate medical specimen rather than a vibrant young boy. "Leo, do not eat the bread," she commanded when he reached for a roll. It might have been sliced on the same board as the nuts. I sliced the bread 3 hours ago. I interrupted, gripping my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Before I even touched the peanut butter, I washed the board with bleach. "Jessica, cross-contamination is invisible." "Charlotte," she said, speaking to me as if I were a slow-witted child, "you cannot see it with the naked eye, especially not with your eyesight." My eyesight was 20/20 with my contacts, but I said nothing. I looked at Leo. He looked miserable. He stared at the bread roll with a longing that broke my heart. "I am hungry." "Mom," Leo said quietly. "Here," Jessica said, pulling a plastic container from her bag. She opened it to reveal limp, steamed broccoli, and plain boiled chicken breast. "Eat this. It is safe." I watched my grandson eat cold chicken from a Tupperware container, while a 5-star meal sat steaming in front of him. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost frightened me. This was not about allergies. This was about control. She was stripping away the joy of food, the joy of family, and the joy of my home, replacing it with her sterile, paranoid dictatorship. I excused myself to go to the kitchen, claiming I needed to check on the dessert. As soon as the swinging door closed behind me, I leaned against the counter and pressed my hands to my face. They think I am senile. I thought, they think I am a dirty, careless old woman. I could hear their muffled voices from the dining room. She is losing it. Mark, Jessica's voice hissed. Did you see how she looked at me when I cleaned the plate? Paranoia is an early symptom. Stop it, Jess. Mark mumbled. She is just proud of her house. She is a liability. Jessica insisted. We need to secure the assets before she accidentally burns the place down or gives it away to a cat shelter. Did you bring the papers? Not tonight, Mark whispered. It is Christmas. Tomorrow then, she said firmly. Do not be a coward. Mark, I stood in the dark kitchen, my heart hammering against my ribs. Assets, papers, liability. The tears that had been threatening to fall evaporated instantly. My sadness was replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was not just a lonely widow hoping for a family reunion. I was a target. I straightened my back and smoothed my dress. I picked up the silver tray for the next course. I would go back out there. I would smile. I would play the part of the gracious, slightly befuddled grandmother, but I would be watching, and I would be listening. The crack in the foundation had appeared, and through it, I could finally see the rot hiding underneath. The annual Miller Christmas Eve party was, by all accounts, a masterpiece of social engineering. I had invited 40 guests, mostly neighbors from the homeowners association, a few of my late husband's business partners, and the local pastor. The house smelled of balsam fir and roasted chestnuts. A string quartet played softly in the corner of the living room, their music floating over the hum of polite conversation. To the casual observer, it was a scene of perfect domestic bliss. However, beneath the surface of my smile, my nerves were stretched as tight as piano wire. I felt less like a hostess and more like a sentry guarding a fortress. Every time Jessica moved, my eyes followed her. She was wearing a crimson dress that clung to her body, holding a glass of sparkling water that she never seemed to sip. She moved through the crowd with a predatory grace, charming the neighbors, laughing at their jokes, and occasionally casting a sorrowful, concerned glance in my direction. I knew what she was doing. She was planting seeds. She was whispering about my confusion, my frailty, preparing the audience for the second act of her play. Mark was no help. He had stationed himself near the bar cart in the library. He was drinking Scotch neat, glass after glass. His face was flushed, and his laughter was too loud, too boisterous. It was the laugh of a man trying to drown out the noise in his own head. I made my way to the kitchen to check on the catering staff. Everything was running smoothly. The peanut-free zone I had established in the sunroom was untouched. The glass dome covering the peanut butter cookies was locked, the key safely tucked inside the pocket of my velvet dress. On the main dining table, accessible to everyone, were the safe cookies, sugar cookies, gingerbread, and shortbread. I had baked them 2 days ago, before I even bought the jar of peanut butter for the other batch. Cross-contamination was physically impossible. I walked back into the living room and saw Leo sitting alone on the window seat. He looked small and miserable amidst the festivities. He was watching the other children, the neighbors' grandkids, who were running around with cookies in their hands, leaving trails of crumbs on the rug. My heart ached for him. He was a pawn in a game he did not understand. I walked over to the main table and picked up a sugar cookie shaped like a star. It was plain, dusted only with white sugar. I used a pair of silver tongs that had never touched a nut in their existence. I placed the cookie on a napkin and walked over to my grandson. "Leo," I said softly. He looked up, his eyes wide and fearful. He glanced around the room, looking for his mother, Jessica was on the other side of the room, talking to Dr. Harrison, a retired surgeon who lived down the street. She seemed distracted. "It is a sugar cookie." "Sweetheart," I whispered, kneeling down so I was at eye level with him. "I made it specially for you. There are no peanuts. I promise. Grandma would never hurt you." Leo hesitated. He looked at the cookie, then at me. I saw the hunger in his eyes, not just for the sugar, but for the connection. He wanted to trust me. He wanted his grandmother back. "Are you sure?" he whispered. "I am 100% sure," I said, smiling warmly. "I baked these on Tuesday. The peanut butter did not even enter the house until Thursday." "Go on." Leo reached out and took the cookie. He took a small bite, then another. He smiled, a genuine, sweet smile that lit up his face. "It is good," he said. "See," I said, reaching out to stroke his hair. "Safe." The moment lasted for exactly 10 seconds. Leo suddenly dropped the half-eaten cookie on the floor. He brought his hands up to his throat. His eyes bulged. He began to cough, a dry, hacking sound that instantly cut through the chatter of the party. "Leo?" I asked, my blood turning to ice. He gasped for air. His face, which had been pale a moment ago, turned a bright, alarming shade of red. He clawed at his neck, making a wheezing sound that was terrifyingly loud in the sudden silence of the room. "Mom," he rasped, "cannot. Xiao yu jing hao ling. 2 hash is greater than breathe. Xiao yu jing hao ling. R jing hao da yu." The glass in my hand slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. "Jessica," I screamed. "Help." Across the room, Jessica spun around. Her reaction was instantaneous, almost as if she had been waiting for a cue. She did not look confused. She did not hesitate. She dropped her water glass and sprinted across the room, her heels clicking violently against the hardwood. She threw herself onto her knees beside Leo. "What did you give him?" she shrieked, her voice tearing through the room. "What did you feed him?" "Just a sugar cookie," I stammered, backing away, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "It was safe. It was from the safe table." "You liar," Jessica screamed. She turned her face to the stunned guests, her eyes wild with manufactured panic. "She gave him a peanut cookie. She poisoned him. I told you she was confused. I told you." "No," I cried, looking around at the faces of my neighbors. They were staring at me with horror, with pity, with judgment. "I did not. The peanut cookies are locked up. Look, I have the key." I fumbled in my pocket for the key, pulling it out to show them, but nobody was looking at the key. They were looking at Leo, who was now writhing on the floor, his skin blotchy and red. "Call 911. Someone shouted. "Where is his EpiPen?" Mark yelled, stumbling into the room, his speech slurred. "Jess, give him the pen." Jessica was fumbling with her clutch. She pulled out the auto-injector, but, strangely, she did not use it immediately. She held it in her hand, looking at Leo, then at me. "You did this," she hissed at me, low enough that only I could hear, before turning back to the room and screaming at the top of her lungs. "She tried to kill my son because I would not let her have her way. She is crazy. Just give him the shot," Dr. Harrison shouted, pushing through the crowd. He grabbed the EpiPen from Jessica's hand and jammed it into Leo's thigh. Leo let out a sharp cry, and then his gasping began to subside slightly, but the redness on his skin did not fade. He looked terrified, tears streaming down his face. Sirens wailed in the distance, getting louder with every second. The sound of the ambulance was the death knell of my reputation. 2 police officers and 3 emergency medical technicians burst through the front door, snow swirling in behind them. The room became a chaotic blur of uniforms, gradios, and shouting. "Who is the responsible party?" a police officer asked, his hand resting on his belt. "She is." Jessica pointed a manicured finger straight at my chest. "Charlotte Miller. She fed a child a known allergen. She has dementia. She does not know what she is doing. She is a danger to herself and everyone else." I stood frozen in the center of my living room. I looked at the shattered glass at my feet. I looked at the half-eaten sugar cookie lying on the rug. It was a star, a simple, innocent star. I whispered, but my voice was lost in the commotion. Mark was kneeling beside Leo, holding the boy's hand, but he would not look at me. He kept his head down, playing the part of the grieving father, shielding his son from the monster. An emergency medical technician approached me. "Madam, step back, please." "But I am his grandmother," I pleaded. "I love him. I would never." "Sao yu tsing hao ling, ar tsing hao da yu." "Step back." Jessica lunged at me, and the police officer had to physically restrain her. "Get away from him. Do not let her near him. She is sick." The officer looked at me. His expression was not unkind, but it was firm. It was the look one gives to a confused animal that needs to be put in a cage. "Madam," the officer said, guiding me away from the boy. "Why do not you go sit in the kitchen? We need to clear the area." "But the cookie, Sao yu tsing ho ling, 2 hash is greater than." I tried to point at the star on the floor. "You have to test the cookie. It has no peanuts. We will handle it." "Madam," he said, dismissively. I watched as they loaded Leo onto the stretcher. I watched as they wheeled him out of my house, into the cold winter night. Jessica followed them, sobbing dramatically. Clutching the paramedic's arm, Mark stumbled after them, pausing at the door only for a second. He looked back at me. For a fleeting moment, the fog of alcohol seemed to clear from his eyes. I saw shame there, deep, dark shame, but he did not speak. He turned his collar up against the wind and walked out, closing the heavy oak door behind him. I was left alone with 40 silent guests. The string quartet had stopped playing. Dr. Harrison looked at me, shaking his head slowly. "Charlotte," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Maybe Jessica is right. Maybe. So yu ting haling. 2 hash is greater than. Maybe it is time to look into assisted living. We all forget things sometimes. But this, Sao yu ting haolin, 2 hashes greater than this, was almost a tragedy. I did not forget. I said, my voice trembling with a rage I had never felt before. I did not forget anything. But as I looked around the room, I realized it did not matter what I said. The verdict had been delivered. In the eyes of my community, in the eyes of the law, and in the eyes of my family, I was no longer Charlotte Miller, the capable matriarch. I was Charlotte Miller, the senile old woman who had almost murdered her grandson with a cookie. And as the blue lights of the ambulance flashed against the snow outside the window, I realized something else. The cookie on the floor, the sugar cookie, was gone. In the chaos, someone had stepped on it, crushing it into a million unrecognizable crumbs. The evidence of my innocence had been destroyed, ground into the wool of my expensive Persian rug. The waiting room of Greenwich Hospital was a purgatory of beige walls and fluorescent lights that hummed with a headache-inducing frequency. I had driven myself there, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my fingers had cramped into claws. I sat in a plastic chair for 3 hours, watching the automatic doors slide open and closed, waiting for someone to tell me that my grandson was alive. When a nurse finally approached me, her face was a mask of professional detachment. "Mrs. Miller?" she asked, looking down at a clipboard. "Yes." I stood up, my knees cracking. "How is Leo? Can I see him?" "I am afraid not," the nurse said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The parents have requested that no visitors be admitted. Specifically you." The words hit me like a physical blow. "But I am his grandmother," I need to explain. "Sayu Jinghao Ling, R. Jinghao Dayu." The mother was very clear. The nurse interrupted, stepping back as if I were contagious. "She stated that your presence would cause the patient distress. If you do not leave, security will have to escort you out." Security in the hospital where my husband had donated a wing for cancer research. I was being threatened with security like a vagrant. I drove home in a daze. The house was exactly as I had left it. Half-empty wine glasses sat on coasters. Napkins were crumpled on the floor. The shattered remains of the glass I had dropped still lay on the rug, glittering under the chandelier lights like diamonds. It looked like a crime scene, which, according to my daughter-in-law, it was. I did not sleep. I sat in the wingback chair in the library, staring at the phone, waiting for it to ring. It was 10 o'clock the next morning when I heard the front door open. Mark and Jessica walked in. They did not knock. They had keys. Of course, Jessica marched straight into the library, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, her makeup smudged artfully to suggest a night of weeping. Mark trailed behind her, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "He is going to be fine," Mark said before I could speak. He would not meet my eyes. He stared at the spines of the leather-bound books on the shelves. The doctors gave him a heavy dose of epinephrine and antihistamines. His throat is still sore, and he is traumatized, but he is breathing. I let out a breath I had been holding for 12 hours. Thank God. "Mark, you have to believe me. I gave him a sugar cookie. I swear on your father's grave." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cruel sound. She walked over to the desk and leaned against it, crossing her arms. "Charlotte," she said, her voice dropping to that patronizing, slow cadence one uses with a toddler. "We found peanut dust on your apron. We found crumbs on the counter where you said you plated the sugar cookies." "That is a lie," I said, my voice shaking. I changed my apron. I sanitized the counter. "Did you?" Jessica tilted her head. "Or do you just think you did?" "Mark and I have been talking. We have noticed things." "Charlotte, for months now, you repeat stories. You lose your keys. You forget names." "I do not," I protested, standing up. "I run this entire estate by myself, and look at the result." Jessica gestured around the room. "You almost killed a child. The doctor said it was a classic case of cross-contamination caused by negligence. He asked us about your mental state. He asked if you had been diagnosed with dementia." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Dementia, the boogeyman of every person over 60. "I do not have dementia," I whispered, but even as I said it, a cold worm of doubt began to burrow into my stomach. Had I forgotten to wash the tongs? Had I touched the peanut butter jar and then touched the sugar cookies without realizing it? My mind felt foggy from the stress. I tried to replay the events of the evening, but the panic had blurred the edges of my memory. The police took a report, Mark said softly. They are calling it an accident for now. But Jessica, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than Jessica wanted to press charges. And I should. Jessica snapped, but Mark begged me not to. He does not want to see his mother in handcuffs. However, we have a responsibility. We cannot leave you here alone. You are a danger to yourself and others. What are you saying? I asked, looking from Mark to Jessica. We are going to contact Adult Protective Services. Jessica said, calm as could be. We need to have a competency hearing. Until then, we are petitioning for an emergency restraining order. You are not to come within 500 feet of Leo, or us. A restraining order? I collapsed back into the chair. Mark, please. He is my grandson. He is my son. Jessica hissed. And you are a confused, sick old woman who cannot tell the difference between a treat and a weapon. We are doing this for your own good. Charlotte, you clearly cannot manage on your own anymore. Mark finally looked at me. His eyes were wet, but there was no resolve in them. He looked defeated. Maybe, Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than maybe you should see a specialist. Mom, he mumbled, just to be sure. If you are sick, we can get you help. There are nice facilities, assisted living places where they cook for you, where you do not have to worry about. Sao Ting Haling, 2# is greater than mistakes. I looked at my hands. They were trembling. Were they trembling because I was angry? Or were they trembling because I was sick? Was this how it started? You think you are fine, and then one day you wake up and you have poisoned the people you love? I am not going to a home, I said, but my voice lacked the fire it had yesterday. I sounded tired. I sounded old. We will see what the judge says, Jessica said, straightening up. We are going to stay at a hotel. We cannot stay here. It is not safe. Come on. Mark. They turned to leave. Mark hesitated at the door. I love you. Mom, he whispered. If you loved me. I said to the empty room after they were gone. You would not let her do this to me. But the doubt was already there, rooting itself in the soil of my fear. I walked to the kitchen and stared at the granite island. I looked for the peanut dust she claimed was there. I wiped my finger across the surface. It came away clean. But was it clean? Or was I just not seeing what was right in front of my eyes? I sat down on the kitchen floor, surrounded by the ghosts of a Christmas that never happened. And for the first time in 40 years, I buried my face in my hands and wept. Not because I was guilty, but because I was no longer sure that I was innocent. 2 days after the incident, the silence in my house was broken again. This time, it was not a festive gathering, but an execution. Mark and Jessica sat across from me at the long mahogany table in the library. Between us sat a stack of crisp, white documents. They looked innocuous enough, like a mortgage application or a contract for roof repairs. But the weight of them seemed to bow the wood of the desk. Jessica did not waste time with pleasantries. She slid a manila envelope toward me. This is a draft of the lawsuit we are prepared to file on Monday morning, she said. Her voice was devoid of emotion, flat and hard like a stone skipping across a frozen lake. The charges include gross negligence, child endangerment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We are seeking $500,000 in damages for Leo's medical bills, future therapy, and pain and suffering. We are also petitioning the court for a permanent restraining order. I stared at the envelope. $500,000. The number was astronomical. Absurd. Leo had spent one night in the hospital. You cannot be serious. I whispered, looking at Mark. Mark, you would sue your own mother? Mark rubbed his temples. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 48 hours. It is not about the money, Mom. It is about leverage. Jessica wants to ensure Leo is safe. She, Sao Ting Haoling, 2 hashes greater than she, is very angry. Her lawyer says we have a slam dunk case. The police report, the witnesses, the dust on your apron. There was no dust, I cried out, but my protest sounded weak, even to my own ears. The lawyer says a jury will see a wealthy, stubborn woman who refused to follow simple safety instructions and nearly killed a child. Jessica interjected, "You will lose, Charlotte, and the press will have a field day. Local socialite Poisson's grandson. Is that how you want the Miller legacy to end?" I felt the room spinning. My legacy, my name. The humiliation would be total. There is another option, Mark said softly. He reached out and placed his hand over mine. His palm was damp. A way to make this all go away. Jessica agrees to drop the lawsuit and the restraining order if Sao Ting Hao Ling 2 hash is greater than well. If we can guarantee safety in another way. He slid the second stack of papers toward me. "What is this?" I asked. "It is a durable power of attorney and a transfer of trusteeship," Mark explained, his voice rushing now, eager to get the words out. "It transfers control of the Miller family trust to me. I would become your legal guardian. I would manage the estate, the finances, and your medical care." I pulled my hand back as if I had been burned. "You want to put me under a conservatorship? Like I am an invalid? It is for your protection," Mark pleaded. "Mom, look at what happened. You are slipping. If you sign this, it proves you are taking responsibility. It shows the court you are acknowledging your Sao Ting Hao Ling. De dièse est supérieur à l'imitation. You stay in the house. Nothing changes in your daily life. I just handle the heavy lifting." And Jessica drops the suit. "You get to see Leo again." I looked at the papers. Declaration of incapacity. The words blurred before my eyes. Maybe they are right. A voice inside me whispered, maybe I am dangerous. Maybe I did mix up the spoons. Maybe I am losing my mind just like Aunt Clara did. The thought was terrifying. If I fought them, I would lose my grandson and my reputation. If I signed, I would lose my freedom. But I would keep my family. I would be safe. They would take care of me. If I sign, Sao Ting Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than I started. My voice trembling. If I sign, can I see Leo for New Year's Eve? Of course. Mark smiled, a look of immense relief washing over his face. We will be a family again, just like always. We will take care of you. Mom. He pulled a heavy fountain pen from his pocket, the Mont Blanc I had given him for his graduation from business school, and uncapped it. He held it out to me. I took the pen. It felt heavy and cold. I looked at the signature line, Charlotte Ann Miller. It was just a signature. It was just a surrender. I lowered the pen to the paper. The nib hovered millimeters above the line. Mark exhaled. He was practically vibrating with anticipation. I glanced up at Jessica. She was not looking at the papers. She was looking at Mark. And for a fraction of a second, her mask slipped. It was not a look of concern. It was not a look of relief. It was a smirk, a tiny, tight curling of the corner of her lip. Her eyes gleamed with a predatory triumph that had nothing to do with child safety and everything to do with the bottom line. In that microsecond, the fog in my brain cleared. I had seen that look before. I had seen it on the face of a contractor who tried to overcharge me for Italian marble that was actually ceramic. I had seen it on the face of a fake charity organizer I had exposed 2 years ago. It was the look of a con artist who had just closed the deal. Why is she smiling? I thought, if her son was truly almost murdered by a senile old woman, she should be crying. She should be terrified. She should not be looking at the contract like it is a winning lottery ticket. My hand froze. Mom? Mark urged, just right there. The gears in my mind, which they claimed were rusted and broken, suddenly slammed into place with crystal clarity. The allergy that suddenly became airborne, the wipes, the immediate accusation, the police, the lawsuit, the rush to sign over the trust. It was too fast. It was too choreographed. I capped the pen. The click sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Mom? Mark's voice cracked. I need to read it, I said. My voice was no longer trembling. It was low and steady. You do not need to read it, Jessica snapped, her smirk vanishing instantly. It is standard legal boilerplate. Mark explained it to you. I never sign anything I have not read, I said, placing the pen down on the table. I am tired. My eyes are straining. Leave the papers. I will review them tonight and give you my answer tomorrow morning. We do not have until tomorrow. Jessica stood up, her hands slamming onto the desk. The lawsuit gets filed at 9 o'clock Monday morning. This offer expires tonight. Then file it, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Mark looked horrified. Mom, no, you do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing. I lead. I did not know. I was bluffing. But I knew one thing. I would not sign my life away to a woman who smirked while her husband betrayed his mother. If you want the trust, Mark, you can wait 24 hours. Now, get out of my house. I have a headache. You are making a mistake. Jessica hissed, grabbing her purse. A huge mistake. We will see, I said. They left. I listened to the sound of their car engine fading down the driveway. I was alone again. My hands were shaking. But this time, it was not from fear. It was from adrenaline. I did not believe I was senile. Not anymore. That smirk had been a mistake. Her mistake. I walked to the kitchen. I did not go to the pantry. Instead, I went to the utility closet and pulled out a stepladder. I climbed up and reached for the top of the kitchen cabinets, where a small, blinking red light was hidden behind a decorative molding. I had installed a nanny cam 3 years ago when I suspected a housekeeper was stealing silverware. I had never taken it down. I had never told anyone it was there. Not even Mark. If I was crazy, the camera would prove it. If I was careless, the camera would show it. But if I was right, 小于井号零, or 井号大于, I pulled the memory card from the device. I walked to my laptop in the study. I inserted the card. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. I clicked on the file dated December 24th. The house was so quiet that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from 2 rooms away. It was a silence that felt heavy, like a woolen blanket soaked in ice water. I sat at the desk in my study, the laptop screen casting a ghostly blue light across my hands. My finger hovered over the trackpad, but I could not bring myself to click the file yet. I was paralyzed by a terrified reluctance. I wanted the truth, but I was also desperately afraid of it, because if I was right, my life as I knew it was over, and if I was wrong, then I truly was the monster they said I was. My throat felt dry, like I had swallowed sand. I needed water. I pushed the chair back and walked to the kitchen. The granite countertops were spotless, gleaming under the under-cabinet lighting. I opened the refrigerator and poured a glass of cold water, drinking it in one long, desperate gulp. My eyes wandered to the recycling bin in the corner. It was overflowing. The cleaning service did not come on holidays, so the remnants of the last 3 days were piled high. Empty wine bottles, cardboard boxes from online deliveries, and plastic containers. Something caught my eye near the top of the pile. It was a small, cobalt blue plastic bottle. It looked out of place among the festive debris. I knelt down, my joints popping in the silence, and reached into the bin. I pulled the bottle out. It was empty. The label was peeled back slightly at the corner. Niacin, 500 milligrams. Flush-free? No. The flush-free label was crossed out with a marker. I frowned. I did not take niacin. Richard used to take it years ago for his cholesterol, but he hated it because it made his skin burn and turn red. He called it the sunburn in a bottle. My heart skipped a beat. Sunburn in a bottle. I remembered Leo's face. The sudden, violent redness. The heat radiating from his skin. It had looked exactly like a severe allergic reaction, but it also looked exactly like a niacin flush. I clutched the empty bottle in my hand so tightly the plastic crinkled. Why was this in my trash? Jessica took vitamins. I knew that, but why would she throw an empty bottle of high-dose niacin in my kitchen recycling bin on Christmas Eve? I stood up, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of my neck. I walked back to the study, the bottle still in my hand. I sat down at the laptop. The hesitation was gone. I needed to know. I opened the video file labeled kitchen_cam_ December 24th. The footage was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. I fast-forwarded through hours of the catering staff prepping vegetables. I saw myself, looking anxious, arranging the cookie platters. I saw myself locking the peanut butter cookies in the glass dome. Then I saw the timestamp, 5:14 in the afternoon, 45 minutes before the guests arrived. The kitchen was empty. Then the side door opened. Jessica walked in. She was not wearing her coat yet. She was in her red dress. She paused in the center of the room, looking up at the corners of the ceiling. My breath hitched. She was looking for cameras, but the camera was hidden inside the intricate crown molding above the cabinets. A tiny pinhole she evidently missed. Satisfied she was alone, Jessica walked over to her purse, which she had left on the counter earlier. She pulled out the blue bottle, the same bottle I now held in my hand. I watched, mesmerized with horror, as she opened a capsule and dumped the white powder onto a small piece of tissue paper. She walked over to the main dining table, the safe table. She did not go to the peanut butter cookies. She went straight to the platter of sugar cookies. On the screen, I saw her hand hover over the star-shaped cookies, the ones I had baked specifically for Leo because he loved the shape. With delicate, precise movements, she dusted the white powder over the top of 3 specific cookies. She blew gently on them to disperse the powder so it would be invisible against the white sugar dusting. Then, she crumpled the tissue paper, shoved it in her pocket, and threw the empty blue bottle into the recycling bin. She smoothed her dress, checked her reflection in the oven door, and smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was a smile of anticipation. I paused the video. I sat there for a long time, staring at the frozen image of my daughter-in-law poisoning the food I had made for her son. It was not an accident. It was not negligence. It was a setup, a cold-blooded, calculated setup designed to humiliate me, question my sanity, and strip me of my assets. She had drugged her own child with a chemical that mimics anaphylactic shock just to get control of my money. A wave of nausea rolled over me. I turned my head and retched dryly, my stomach twisting in knots. But there was another piece of the puzzle missing. Mark, did he know? I wanted to believe he was innocent. I wanted to believe he was just a weak man, manipulated by a sociopathic wife. He was my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the garden. My computer pinged. A notification slid onto the top right corner of the screen. From J. Henderson Investigations. Subject: Financial background check. Mark Miller. Urgent. I had called Jim Henderson, an old friend of Richard's and a retired Federal Bureau of Investigation agent, 2 days ago, right after the hospital, when the first seed of doubt had been planted. I had asked him to look into Mark's finances, just to see if there was a reason they were pressing so hard for the money. I opened the email. There was no body text, just an attached portable document format file. I opened it. The document was 10 pages long. I skipped the introduction and went straight to the summary. Subject: Mark Richard Miller. Current financial status: insolvent. The words blurred. I forced myself to focus. Subject has outstanding liabilities totaling $7.4 million. Primary debts are tied to high-risk leverage trading in cryptocurrency and offshore futures markets. All liquid assets have been seized or liquidated. The subject's home in Darien is in pre-foreclosure. The subject's vehicles are leased and currently 3 months behind on payments. $7 million. My son had gambled away everything. But it was the next paragraph that shattered my heart into a million irreparable pieces. Note: Subject has taken out 3 high-interest short-term loans from private lenders with ties to organized crime syndicates in New Jersey. The principal amount is $2 million. Repayment was due on December 25th. Missed payment penalties include severe physical threats. Subject is desperate. I closed the laptop. The room felt suddenly very small, like a coffin. Mark knew. Of course he knew. He did not just know. He needed this. The lawsuit, the power of attorney, the rush to get control of the trust. It was not about protecting Leo. It was about paying off loan sharks before they broke his legs. My son had not just stood by while his wife poisoned his child. He had likely helped plan it. He had looked me in the eye, hugged me, and told me he loved me, all while waiting for the moment he could sacrifice me to save himself. He was willing to let the world believe I was senile. He was willing to have me locked away in a facility, medicated and forgotten, so he could drain my accounts to cover his gambling debts. I thought about the way he had cried at the hospital. I thought about the way he had begged me to sign the papers. I had interpreted it as the anguish of a father. Now I saw it for what it was, the terror of a debtor running out of time. A sound escaped my lips. It was a low, guttural wail that did not sound human. It was the sound of a mother's heart breaking. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was still falling outside. Beautiful and indifferent. The world looked peaceful. But inside this house, everything had died. The Charlotte Miller who existed this morning. The woman who believed in family, in legacy, in blood, was gone. She had been murdered by a blue bottle of niacin and a portable document format file. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I looked old. I looked tired, but as I stared, the expression on my face began to change. The shock was fading, replaced by something colder, something harder. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a confused old woman who would sign anything to be loved. They had bet everything on my maternal instinct, on my softness. They had forgotten who I was. I was the wife of Richard Miller, a man who built an empire from nothing. I had helped him build it. I had balanced the books. I had hosted the dinners that closed the deals. I was not just a grandmother baking cookies. I was the gatekeeper of this fortune. I turned back to the room. I picked up the blue bottle from the desk. I placed it in a Ziploc bag. I ejected the memory card from the laptop and put it in my safe. I printed the private investigator's report. I was not going to sign the papers. I was not going to settle. I was going to host a dinner party. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's personal cell number. It was 11 o'clock at night, but I knew he would answer. "Charlotte?" His voice was groggy. "Is everything all right?" "No, Arthur," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of any tremor. "Everything is wrong, but I am going to fix it. I need you here tomorrow evening at 6 o'clock. Bring a notary." "And Arthur?" "Sao yu ting har ling. Ket tu?" "Yes." "Bring the draft for a new will. I am making some changes." I hung up the phone. I looked at the empty spot on the table where the peanut butter cookies had been. They wanted a villain, I thought, a dark smile touching my lips. Fine, I will show them what a villain looks like. The dining room was set for a funeral, although my guests believed they were attending a coronation. I had instructed the staff to set the table with the Royal Copenhagen Flora Danica dinnerware, the most expensive porcelain in my collection. The gold rims gleamed under the dimmed chandelier lights. In the center of the table, instead of flowers, I had placed low candelabras with black taper candles. The effect was dramatic, solemn, and undeniably expensive. I sat at the head of the table, waiting. I was not wearing the apron of a grandmother tonight. I was wearing a high-collared black silk blouse and my pearls, the strand Richard had bought me in Paris for our 30th anniversary. My hair was pulled back into a severe chignon. I looked in the mirror across the room. I did not look frail. I looked like a judge. Arthur, my attorney for the last 20 years, sat to my right. He was a man of few words and stone-faced expressions. He knew everything. We had spent the morning reviewing the video footage and the financial reports. He had been horrified, but I had forbidden him from showing any emotion tonight. He was simply the executioner's witness. At 6 o'clock precisely, the doorbell rang. I heard the housekeeper let them in. Mark and Jessica entered the dining room with an air of suppressed excitement. They tried to look somber, to maintain the charade of the concerned family. But the energy radiating off them was frenetic. They smelled like greed. "Mom," Mark said, moving to kiss my cheek. His lips were cold. "You look saluting howling. 2 hash is greater than well. Rested." "I am as well as can be expected," I said, my voice deliberately soft, bordering on weak. I allowed my hand to tremble slightly as I reached for my water glass. "Please, sit down. Thank you for coming." Jessica sat to my left. She was wearing a new dress, something designer that I suspected she had bought on credit, anticipating the windfall she expected to receive within the hour. She glanced at Arthur, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I did not know we would have company," Jessica said, her tone sharp. "We thought this was a private family matter." "Arthur is family," I murmured, keeping my eyes on the tablecloth. "And since we are discussing legal documents, I thought it best he be here to saluting howling, to guide me. I get so confused lately." I saw Jessica exchange a look with Mark. It was a look of triumph. She admits it. Her eyes said, "We have won, of course." "Charlotte," Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "It is good to have support. We just want to get this settled so everyone can move on. Especially poor Leo." "How is Leo?" I asked. "He is recovering." Jessica Seahill, unfolding her napkin. "He is still traumatized." "Of course. He asks why his grandmother wanted to hurt him. It is heartbreaking to hear." The lie was so bold, so vicious, that I felt a physical pain in my chest. But I did not react. I simply nodded slowly, like a woman beaten down by guilt. "Let us eat," I said. The first course was served in silence. Lobster bisque, rich, creamy, and decadent. I watched Mark eat. He ate quickly, shoveling the food into his mouth as if he had not eaten in days. Perhaps he had not. Stress does terrible things to a man's appetite. But the prospect of $7 million brings it right back. Jessica picked at her food. She kept glancing at the leather briefcase sitting by Arthur's feet. She was impatient. She wanted the main event. "So," Mark said, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin, "did you read the papers?" "Mom?" "I did," I said. "They were very sauteng. 2# is greater than thorough. It is the best solution," Mark said, leaning forward. "You stay here. You keep your lifestyle. I just handle the stress of the accounts. And the lawsuit goes away. We can be a family again." A family? I repeated the word. Tasting it, it tasted like bile. "Yes, that is all I ever wanted." "Then let us do it," Jessica said, pushing her bowl away. "Why wait? Arthur, do you have the documents?" Arthur looked at me. I gave a barely perceptible nod. Arthur reached into his briefcase, but he did not pull out the power of attorney documents Mark had drafted. He pulled out a single, thin remote control. "Before we sign anything," I said, my voice suddenly losing its tremor. I sat up straighter. The frailty evaporated from my posture. "I have prepared a short presentation. I think it is important that we are all on the same page regarding the events of Christmas Eve." "A presentation?" Mark frowned. "Mum, what is this? We do not have time for home movies." "Make time," I said. The command was absolute. It was the voice I used when I fired incompetent contractors. It silenced the room instantly. I pointed the remote at the large flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. A television usually reserved for Mark to watch football games during holidays. The screen flickered to life. The grainy black and white footage of my kitchen appeared. Mark looked confused. Jessica went still. Her hand froze halfway to her wine glass. "What is this?" Jessica whispered. "Watch," I said. On the screen, Jessica walked into the frame. We watched in silence as she checked the ceiling for cameras. We watched as she pulled the blue bottle from her purse. We watched her crush the niacin. We watched her dust the sugar cookies. The silence in the dining room was absolute. It was a vacuum, sucking the air out of our lungs. On the screen, digital Jessica smiled that cold, self-satisfied smile and threw the bottle into the recycling bin. I pressed the pause button. The image of Jessica, frozen in the act of poisoning her own son, loomed over us. I placed the remote gently on the table. I looked at Jessica. Her face had drained of all color. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish pulled from the water, gasping for life. "Niacin," I said calmly. 500 milligrams. It causes cutaneous flushing, itching, and heat. It mimics an allergic reaction perfectly. Does it not, Jessica? Especially to an untrained eye. Especially when accompanied by a hysterical mother screaming about peanuts. This, Xiaoyuting Haoling, too, Jessica stammered. Her voice was a squeak. This is fake. You doctored this. Deep fake. Technology can do anything these days. It is time-stamped. Arthur spoke for the first time. His voice was a deep baritone, heavy with authority, and we have the original memory card. We also recovered the bottle from the recycling bin. It has your fingerprints on it, Jessica. We have already had a private lab confirm it. Jessica turned to Mark. Mark, do something. She is framing me. But Mark was not looking at Jessica. He was staring at the screen, his eyes wide with horror. For a moment, I thought perhaps he truly did not know. Perhaps he was a victim too. You poisoned him? Mark whispered, his voice trembling. Jess, Xiaoyuting Haling, 2# is greater than you actually gave him pills. You told me it was just a rash. You told me he just got hives from the dust. I did it for us. Jessica shrieked, slamming her hands on the table. For us? Mark, we are drowning. We needed the money. You said we needed the money, or they were going to kill you. The room went silent again. Mark closed his eyes. He looked like a man who had been shot in the gut. He had not known the method, but he had known the goal. He had known she was going to do something. Thank you for clarifying that, Jessica, I said coldly. I was wondering how much Mark knew. I reached under the table and pulled out a manila folder. I slid it across the mahogany surface until it hit Mark's hand. $7,400,000. I said. Mark flinched as if I had slapped him. He looked down at the folder but did not open it. He knew what was inside. Gambling debts. I continued, reciting the facts as if I were reading a grocery list. Crypto futures, and $2 million owed to private lenders in New Jersey. Lenders who do not use lawyers to collect their debts. Is that right? Mark put his head in his hands. He began to sob. It was a pathetic, wet sound. I am sorry. He choked out. Mom, I am so sorry. I tried to fix it. I thought, Xiaoyuting Hao, Lean. 2# is greater than I thought if I could just get control of the trust. I could pay them off. I would have paid it back. I swear. You would have paid it back? I asked, my voice rising slightly. With what? Mark? My money? Your father's legacy. You are going to declare me incompetent, lock me away in a facility, and drain 50 years of hard work to pay for your stupidity? They were going to hurt me. Mark wept. They sent photos of the house. They knew where Leo went to school, so you decided to hurt me instead. I said, you decided to sacrifice your mother. I had no choice, Mark yelled, looking up. His face was red, streaked with tears and snot. You have millions sitting in accounts doing nothing. You are old. You do not need it. Why are you so selfish? There it was, the truth. It was not about fear. It was about entitlement in his mind. My money was already his. I was just an obstacle, standing between him and his inheritance. I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. Selfish? I repeated. I worked side by side with your father for 40 years. I raised you. I paid for your college. I paid for your wedding. I paid for your first house. And now, you try to steal the rest. I walked over to the fireplace and stood under the television screen, under the image of Jessica's crime. There will be no lawsuit, I said, because if you file a single paper, I will turn this video and the bottle over to the district attorney. Attempted poisoning of a minor. Filing a false police report. Extortion. You will both go to prison for a very long time. Jessica was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Ruining her makeup. You cannot. Leo needs his mother. Leo needs a mother who does not use him as a prop in a con game. I shouted, my control finally snapping. My voice echoed off the walls. You are a monster. Jessica, and you, Mark. Sao Yuting howling. 2 hashes greater than you are weak. Which is worse? I turned to Arthur. Give them the document. Arthur pulled a single sheet of paper from his briefcase. He slid it toward Mark. What is this? Mark asked, wiping his eyes. It is a voluntary relinquishment of all claims to the Miller estate. I said, and a resignation from the trust. You are signing away your inheritance, all of it, in exchange. I will not call the police tonight. I will not send your wife to jail. I will give you 24 hours to leave the state. Leave the state? Mark hasped. But, Sao Yuting howling. Dwa, my job. The house? You have no job. I said, and the bank owns the house. As for the loan sharks, Sao Yuting howling. 2 hashes greater than, that is your problem. Mark, you are a grown man. Figure it out. Mom, please. Mark fell to his knees. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my skirt. Please, they will kill me. Help me. Just this once. I am your son. I looked down at him. I saw the little boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for a bandage. I saw the teenager who needed help with his tie for prom. I felt the ancient, biological pull to protect him, to open my checkbook, to fix it one last time. But then I looked at the screen. I saw the white powder falling on the cookie. I saw the smirk on Jessica's face. I saw the absolute betrayal of everything I held sacred. If I saved him now, I would be killing him slowly. I would be enabling the sickness that had brought us here. I pulled my skirt from his grasp. I have no son. I said, my voice was hollow. My son died the moment he agreed to let his wife poison my grandson. I looked at Jessica. She was staring at me with pure hatred. Sign the paper, I said, or I call the police right now. Arthur placed the Mont Blanc pen, the same pen Mark had tried to make me use, on the table. With shaking hands, Mark climbed back into his chair. He looked at Jessica. She gave a slight, defeated nod. They had no cards left to play. Mark signed. Then Jessica signed. Get out. I said, Mom, Sao Yuting howling. 2 hash is greater than Mark started. Get out, I screamed, pointing at the door. And never, ever come back. If I see you on this property again, I will have you arrested for trespassing. They scrambled out of the chairs. They ran out of the room like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I heard the front door slam, then the sound of their car peeling out of the driveway. I stood in the silence of the dining room. The candles were still burning. The lobster bisque was cold. The image of Jessica was still frozen on the screen. I looked at Arthur. He was putting the signed document into his briefcase. He looked at me with sad, kind eyes. You did the right thing. Charlotte, he said softly. I know, I whispered. I walked over to the table and blew out the candles. One by one, the room plunged into darkness, save for the ghostly light of the television. I had won. I had kept my fortune. I had defeated my enemies. But as I stood there in the dark, I realized that the price of victory was absolute desolation. I was the queen of a kingdom that had no citizens. I turned off the television. The screen went black. Arthur, I said in the darkness, draft the new will tomorrow. Everything goes to charity, but set up a blind trust for Leo. Education only, no access for the parents. Make it ironclad. Consider it done. He said, good night, Arthur. Good night, Charlotte. He left. I locked the door behind him. I slid the deadbolt into place. It was a heavy, metallic sound. Click. I was safe. I was rich. I was right, and I was entirely alone. The next morning, I woke to the ringing of my phone. The shrill sound sliced through the silence of the house like a shard of glass. I knew, with a certainty that settled in my bones, who was calling. The news had broken. The press had a field day. The local paper, the Greenwich Citizen, splashed the headline across the front page. Local heiress accused of poisoning grandson with peanut butter cookie. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and speculation. It quoted sources close to the family who painted me as a cantankerous, increasingly frail woman who had grown isolated from the community. There were blurry pictures of Leo being wheeled into the ambulance and a grainy shot of me standing on my front lawn, looking stunned. The reporters swarmed the house. They camped out on the lawn, armed with telephoto lenses. They harassed my neighbors, angling for quotes. My phone rang nonstop, filled with calls from journalists, gossiping friends, and a few distant relatives I had not spoken to in decades. Each call was a fresh wound. The story was picked up by the national news. My face flashed on the television during the morning shows. The commentators used phrases like family drama, trust issues, and alleged attempt. The commentators seemed to relish the scandal. I was a cautionary tale, a symbol of the dangers of wealth and isolation. I did not answer the phone. I did not open the door. I retreated into myself, into the cold, empty house, and became a ghost. The only person I spoke to was Arthur. He arrived at 11 o'clock. He looked grim. The press is everywhere, he said, handing me a stack of clipped newspapers. I would advise you to stay indoors. I am bringing in a security detail, and I suggest you do not speak to anyone. Not until we issue a statement. I scanned the papers. The details of the video footage had not been leaked, but the general narrative had been established. I was a crazy old woman, a danger to those around me. They will twist everything, I said, handing the papers back to him. That is what they do. Arthur agreed. The most important thing is to control the narrative. We will emphasize the fact that Jessica and Mark were attempting to defraud you, that they were financially motivated. We will paint them as the villains. We have the video, the financial records, and the signed documents, but I will still be the villain to them, I said, looking out the window at the reporters camped out on my lawn. I will still be the crazy old woman who tried to poison her grandson. The damage is done. The truth always comes out eventually, Arthur said, though his voice lacked conviction. The next few days were a blur of lawyers, police interviews, and endless paperwork. Arthur filed a countersuit against Mark and Jessica for fraud and attempted extortion. He filed a restraining order against them. The financial institutions began the process of freezing their assets. The media circus continued. The house became a fortress. My neighbors, once eager to invite me to luncheons and parties, turned their backs. They crossed the street when they saw me. They avoided eye contact. Whispers followed me down the grocery store aisles. I was a pariah, a threat to the comfortable order of their lives. Even the church, where I had been a devoted member for 40 years, seemed to distance itself. The pastor stopped returning my calls. I stopped going to services. Then came the court date. The hearing was brief. The judge, after reviewing the video footage and hearing the testimony from Arthur and myself, granted the restraining order. Mark and Jessica did not appear. Their attorney filed a motion to dismiss the charges, claiming their clients were being falsely accused and that the video was manipulated. But the judge ruled in my favor. "Mrs. Miller," the judge said, looking at me with a mixture of pity and respect, "I am sorry for your loss." Loss. It was not the loss of the money. It was not the loss of my reputation. It was the loss of my family. It was the loss of the future I had envisioned. The future where I would watch my great-grandchildren run through my gardens and be surrounded by the laughter of loved ones. It was the loss of everything that had mattered most. After the hearing, I emerged from the courthouse into a storm of flashbulbs and shouted questions. The reporters were relentless. "Mrs. Miller, do you feel any remorse? Do you blame Jessica for poisoning her son? Do you think Mark knew?" I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on the sidewalk. My security detail pushed through the crowd. I was whisked away in a black sport utility vehicle, the sounds of the media fading behind me. I went home. The house was empty. The reporters were still on my lawn, but I did not care anymore. I was immune to the barbs, to the judgment, to the pity. I had won the battle, but I had lost the war. The snow had finally stopped falling. Outside my windows, the world was a pristine, blinding white sheet of ice, covering the scars of the tire tracks left by the news vans and the police cruisers. It had been 1 week since the dinner party, 1 week since I had severed the limb to save the body. The house was quiet. It was not the peaceful quiet of a library or a church. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a mausoleum. I walked through the rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. I stopped in the dining room. The table had been cleared by the staff, the silver polished and put away, the crystal returned to the cabinets. There was no trace of the confrontation. There was no trace of Mark or Jessica. It was as if they had never been here at all. I walked over to the corner table where the glass dome still sat. Inside, the peanut butter cookies were stale now. They looked innocent, just flour, sugar, and nuts. It was hard to believe that something so simple had been the catalyst for the destruction of my lineage. I picked up the red card I had made. Caution, contains nuts. I stared at it for a long moment. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, I tore the card in half, then in quarters. I dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. There was no one left to warn. There was no one left to protect. I went to my study and unlocked the wall, safe hidden behind the portrait of Richard. Inside, next to my jewelry and the deed to the house, was a small, cheap prepaid cell phone. I had given the twin of this phone to Leo last year, whispering to him that it was our secret hotline for emergencies or for when he just wanted to say hello to Grandma without his mother hovering. I hesitated. My hand hovered over the device. The lawyers had told me to cut all contact. They said it was cleaner that way. But the lawyers did not have a grandson who had been used as a pawn in a game of Russian roulette. I picked up the phone and dialed the number. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up, my heart hammering against my ribs, when a small, tentative voice answered. "So Yu Xinghao, Ling, 2# is greater than Grandma?" The sound of his voice, thin and scared, nearly broke me. I sat down heavily in Richard's leather chair, gripping the armrest. "Hello, Leo," I said. I forced my voice to be steady, warm, the voice of the grandmother he remembered, not the monster the news had painted. "Are you safe? We are at a motel." Leo whispered. "Mom cries all the time. Dad yells at her. They say, 'Sao yu jing hao ling.' 2# is greater than they say we lost everything because of you. Is it true? Do you hate us?" I closed my eyes. Tears leaked out, hot and fast, tracking through the powder on my cheeks. How could I explain to a 12-year-old boy that I had destroyed his parents to save him? How could I tell him that his mother had poisoned him for a paycheck? I could not. That truth would destroy him. So I had to bear the burden of being the villain in his story. "At least for now, I do not hate you, Leo," I said softly. "I love you more than anything in this world." Adults, 小于井号零, 2# is greater than adults make mistakes, big mistakes, and sometimes there are consequences that are very hard to understand. "When can I see you?" he asked, his voice cracked. "Not for a long time, sweetheart," I said, the words tasting like ash. "But I need you to listen to me. I have set up a special account for you, for your school, for college. Your parents cannot touch it. It is just for you. No matter what happens, your future is safe. Do you understand?" "I guess," he sniffled. "I just want to go home." "I know," I whispered. "I know. Be brave. Leo, be better than us." I heard a door slam in the background on his end. Then Jessica's voice, shrill and angry. "Who are you talking to?" "Give me that." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone. I took the battery out and placed the pieces back in the safe. It was done. That was likely the last time I would hear his voice for years. Maybe forever. I spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen. I did not bake. I simply sat at the island, watching the light change across the countertops. Arthur called at 4 o'clock. "It is finished," he said. "The new will is executed. The blind trust for Leo is active. Mark and Jessica have vacated the state. My sources say they are heading to Florida to stay with Jessica's sister. The creditors will likely follow them there." "Thank you, Arthur," I said. "Charlotte," he paused. "Are you going to be all right? I am wealthy." "Arthur," I said, looking around my immaculate, empty kitchen. "I am vindicated. I am safe." "That is not what I asked," he said gently. I did not answer him. I hung up the phone. I walked to the window and looked out at the vast, snowy lawn. It was beautiful. It was perfect. And it was completely desolate. I had built a fortress to keep the world out, but I had locked myself in. The silence pressed against my ears, heavy and absolute. I had won the game. I had outsmarted the con artists. I had protected the family fortune, but as the sun began to set, casting long, bruised shadows across the snow, I realized the terrible truth of my victory. I had nothing left to lose, because I had nothing left at all. It has been exactly 365 days since the ambulance pulled away from my front door, painting the snow red with its flashing lights. Tonight, the Connecticut sky is pitch black, devoid of stars, and the wind is howling against the storm windows like a lost soul demanding entry. Inside, the Miller estate is warm. The thermostat is set to 72 degrees. The Christmas tree in the corner is 12 feet tall, a perfect Douglas fir adorned with vintage glass ornaments that have survived 4 decades of cats. children, and movers. It is a masterpiece of holiday decor, and it is completely silent. I am sitting in the wingback chair by the fireplace. The flames are dying down, reducing the oak logs to glowing embers. On the small side table next to me sits a crystal glass of Pinot Noir and a porcelain plate. On the plate is a single peanut butter cookie, topped with a chocolate kiss. I baked them this afternoon. I did not bake them for guests. I did not bake them for family. I baked them for myself. The act was a reclamation. I needed to prove that my kitchen was mine again, that the scent of roasted peanuts was no longer the scent of fear or accusation. I pick up the cookie. It is heavy, warm, and perfect. For the last year, I have lived in a state of impeccable, steady peace. My bank accounts are secure. The trust is locked down tighter than Fort Knox. The new will is drafted. I signed and filed, ensuring that every dime of the Miller fortune will go to the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, save for the educational fund for Leo. I have won every legal battle. I have silenced every critic. The neighbors have stopped whispering, mostly because they have stopped seeing me. I have become the eccentric recluse of Greenwich, a ghost story they tell over cocktails. But as I stare at the fire, the triumphant narrative I tell myself begins to fray at the edges. I think of Mark. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that he is working as a car salesman in Tampa. They live in a 2-bedroom apartment. It is a far cry from the life he was born into. Part of me feels a surge of vindication. He is finally learning the value of $1. He is finally facing the consequences. I shielded him from his entire life. And that is the jagged pill I have to swallow tonight. Mark was not born a monster. He was made one, and I was the architect. I remember when he was 16 and crashed his car. I paid off the other driver so insurance would not go up. I remember when he failed out of his first college. I donated a library wing to get him into the second one. I remember paying off his first credit card debt, and his second. I taught him that consequences were things that happened to other people. Poor people. People without a mother like Charlotte Miller. I created the weakness that Jessica exploited. I fed the entitlement that eventually tried to devour me. The realization is not sharp like a knife. It is dull and aching, like arthritis in the winter. I am not just the victim of a greedy son. I am the enabler who crippled him with comfort. I look at the empty chairs across the room. I imagine Leo sitting there, opening presents. I miss him with a physical intensity that makes it hard to breathe. I saved his financial future. Yes, but I lost his childhood. He will grow up thinking his grandmother is a villain, or perhaps just a sad, distant memory. He will learn to hate me because that is the story his parents will tell him to survive their own shame. That is the price of the checkmate. You clear the board, but then you have no one left to play with. I lift the cookie to my lips. I take a bite. It tastes sweet, salty, and rich. It tastes exactly like the cookies Richard and I used to eat on our first Christmas together, when we had no money and nothing but hope. Now, I have all the money in the world and nothing but memory. I chew slowly, swallowing the sugar and the truth together. I am safe. No one is trying to poison me. No one is trying to gaslight me. No one is waiting for me to die. I have my dignity. I have my home. I finish the cookie and wipe the crumbs from my lip with a linen napkin. I take a sip of wine. Merry Christmas. Charlotte, I whisper to the empty room. The only answer is the crackle of the dying fire and the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, counting down the seconds of a very long, very quiet night. I am the queen of my castle, sitting on a throne of ice, and I have never been more powerful or more profoundly alone, Charlotte's victory tastes less like champagne and more like cold medicine. While it is easy to despise Jessica's greed, the uncomfortable truth lies in Charlotte's mirror. She was not just a victim, she was the architect of her own tragedy. By shielding Mark from every consequence for 40 years, she did not raise a son. She fed a parasite. The story serves as a brutal reminder that money can buy obedience, but it cannot buy character. The deepest lesson here is about the high cost of boundaries. We often think setting boundaries brings peace, and it does, but sometimes that peace comes in the form of absolute silence. Charlotte chose the pain of loneliness over the pain of betrayal, proving that it is better to be the queen of an empty castle than a prisoner in a full house. Leaving you with this question to haunt your sleep tonight. If you knew that the only way to keep your family close was to let them slowly destroy you, would you still open the door? Or would you, like Charlotte, finally change the locks?